Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Crime Driven with me, Gigi. Today we are excited to bring you episode 2 of our podcast, The Murder of Dianne Nelms, a beautiful young single mother. The case we are discussing today is somewhat of a second part to episode 1, which was about the mysterious disappearance of Linda Reynolds, and you will understand why I say somewhat of a second part as the story begins to unfold. You will also learn why there is a possible connection between the two cases. So, if you have not listened to episode 1, you may want to go back and listen to that episode now, so you will be privy to some of the information we are going to talk about in this case. Dianne Luckett Nelms was born in 1953 in Texas. She was also the oldest of 6 children. She was described by her family as a sweet, innocent, and beautiful child who, like most young people, was also a little on the wild side. Around the time she was 17, she met a man named Gene. They were married in March of 1970 in Bowie County, Texas. The marriage really didn't last that long because by August of 1971, they were divorced. Not long after her divorce from Gene, she met and married a man named John K. Nelms. And this was around August of 1974 in Wichita County, Texas. They had a son together who they named Kelly. A few years after their son was born, Dianne and her husband decided to separate and then divorce, which they did around October of 1980. And that was back in Bowie County, Texas. Some of our resources suggested that there was issues with drugs and alcohol in the relationship, which caused a disagreement in the marriage that led to the divorce. According to Dianne's sister, Cicely, not long after that, it was when Dianne met a new man and had begun another relationship. The relationship sparked quickly, and Dianne decided to move with him and her 8-year-old son Kelly to the Fort Smith, Arkansas area, where her boyfriend had found a job. It was later determined that she actually resided in the Sallisaw, Oklahoma area, which is about 35 minutes or so from Fort Smith. Since Fort Smith is the biggest city in the area, many people that live in the smaller towns of Oklahoma and Arkansas commute to Fort Smith for jobs, for shopping, or for the nightlife. The romance between Dianne and her boyfriend did not last very long, and less than a year later they broke up. Dianne liked living in the Fort Smith area, though. She found herself a job as a cocktail waitress at a night spot called Tiffany's. Dianne often went to local after-hours bars when she finished her shift at Tiffany's to meet up with friends that she had met since she's been living in the area. Dianne had a coworker named Dee Webster. Dee's daughter would often babysit Dianne's son while she was at work, and she would pick him up on her way home. In early July of 1983, after her shift at Tiffany's, she decided she wanted to go out to an after-hours bar called Foxfire to have a drink before she went home. She called the babysitter and told her that she would be there soon, that she just wanted to have a drink with some friends, and then she would be right over to pick up Kelly. Just to be clear, though, she did not actually go to the bar with anyone. She probably just wanted to stop by and see who was there that she knew. So that's what she did. She parked her truck behind what was then a closed Pizza Hut building on Towson Ave. Today it's a Fried Rice No. 2 restaurant. At the time, it was an empty building, just a short walk across the parking lot from the Foxfire Club, where she was headed. And Foxfire Club was located at 3810 Towson Avenue in Fort Smith, just for reference. Another coworker of Dianne's, named Wade Frazier, who worked at Tiffany's with her as a bartender, was also the bartender at the Foxfire Club where Dianne stopped to have a drink. Wade recalls Dianne coming in that night and ordering a drink. He also recalls, right after he gave her the drink, Dianne saying she would be right back in. She was going to go outside with a man she met to get high. According to her sister, Dianne was known by her friends and family to dabble in the use of street drugs sometimes. She says it varied how often Dianne used drugs. There were times she used heavy and other times that it was just occasionally. Honestly, I don't think it mattered much how much drugs she used or when. Either way, no one deserves to be kidnapped or murdered. I just wanted to put that out there. So back to Wade. Wade said in an interview that he did not recall who the man was or what he looked like. All he knows is that was the last time he ever saw Dianne again. I'm trying to understand what that means, because that's not saying he didn't know the man or that it wasn't somebody that was a regular patron, but maybe more like he didn't see or know who Dianne was talking about. Either way, of course, at that moment, Wade did not think anything when Dianne never came back for her drink that night. He just figured she might have gone somewhere else to hang out, or it had just got too late. She ended up going home for the night. Later the next day, Wade said he got a call from Dee, the other coworker, and the mother of the babysitter to Dianne's son. She was asking if he had seen or heard from Dianne, and Wade was like, no, not since last night when she came into the bar. He explained to Dee about seeing Dianne the night before at the Foxfire and about Dianne leaving to go outside. Dee had then told Wade that Dianne never came back. She was getting worried. She never picked up her son from the babysitter the night before, and she couldn't get a hold of her. She was trying to call her. Now, to me, that is big red flag number 1. But I'm not them, and they're not me. I'm just saying, if I was babysitting a friend's child and the friend never came to pick up the child like they have every other time I've watched them, I'd be very concerned and probably would have already called the police. But maybe Dee didn't want to make a big deal out of something that could just be nothing. There was something that they did know. It was not like Dianne to not pick up her son, as he was her pride and joy. And according to Dianne's sister, no matter what was going on in her life, she would never leave her son. He was her everything. After most of the day went on, the concern that Wade and Dee had grew stronger and stronger. And even more so when Wade arrived for his shift at the Foxfire that night. During his shift, he noticed something very strange. As he was taking out the trash, he noticed that Dianne's truck was still parked next to the building in the same spot it was the night before, next to the Pizza Hut building. That, to me, is big red flag number 2, in my opinion. Now, assuming the worst, Wade decides it's time to call the police and report Dianne missing. At this point, police take the report, I assume talk to Wade, and probably Dee, and start their investigation. In a report I found from Fort Smith police files, it was said she left in a vehicle with a man named Neil. Now, where they got this information, I'm not sure. It doesn't say anything about who told them that. It could have been Wade, could have been Dee, could have been another patron of the bar that night. But there also has been reports that there may have been a group of people that left together from the Foxfire that night with Dianne and Neil. Everyone was going to a party at Harry's Club in Roland, Oklahoma. Now, if you remember from another story that we told you, episode 1, Roland, Oklahoma and Harry's Club is just over the bridge, about 5 to 10 minutes away from Fort Smith. So keep that in mind. Neil has said in interviews with police, he and Dianne went to Harry's off Highway 64 between Fort Smith and Roland, Oklahoma, to party. That's because he had keys to the club and offered to let some people play pool there even after the bar was closed for the night. Neil was identified as an employee of a promotions/production company called Wildfire Productions that operated out of Harry's bar, and that is why he had access to the closed club. Just a little pause in Dianne's story for a minute, and let's go back to Linda Reynolds' story. That was episode 1 of our podcast. I want you guys to make note of some of these same locations that we have talked about in both cases, because this is the part where the similarities in both cases come into play. Number 1, both frequented and were probably at all these same bars the nights they disappeared. And number 2, they also both left with an unknown male. Either way, Neil claims that he returned Dianne to her truck early the next morning, and he drove off and never saw her again. That, you guys, would be big red flag number 3. I'm sorry, but when someone puts themselves with the person that is missing and no one else to corroborate the story, that is like holding up a sign that reads, "Guilty, I'm guilty," or "I know more than I'm telling you," but Neil denied having any involvement in her disappearance and eventually hired an attorney and stopped talking to the police altogether. This part I get to some extent. If I felt that I may be turning into a suspect or someone suspicious in a person's disappearance or anything like that, I would lawyer up real quick as well, guilty or not. On the other hand, I would still talk to detectives and give them as much information as possible to help solve the case. I guess unless I was guilty, at some point within the next day or two, with no signs of Dianne, and detectives had to call Dianne's mother to tell her that Dianne is missing, that she needed to come get Kelly because at this point he is still at the babysitter's house, probably just as worried as everyone else about why his mother has not come to pick him up. The family was at a loss for many weeks with no answers and no Dianne. Family had no idea what to think. Knowing she was a little wild and may have been doing drugs, at the time, her mother decided to go and file for custody of Kelly, which she was granted. Just in case this was unfortunately Dianne being neglectful, even though they were sure that was not what happened. But just to be on the safe side for Kelly's sake, she did it anyway. Now, months have passed. There were no new leads or tips coming in from the police that were significant to the investigation at all, really. No one else that they talked to had any information that could bring them any closer to finding Dianne. And we know suspect number one, Neil, was not talking to police anymore. And his lawyer probably wasn't talking to anyone either, or talking to the police, or Neil was not talking to the police through his lawyer, I'm sure of that. There was one thing that was worth looking into, since there was a lot of suspicion around Neil. And maybe not just in the disappearance of Dianne Nelms either. Police did do an interview with Neil's girlfriend at the time. When this interview took place, it's not known, but it was not long after Dianne disappeared. Could have been around the same time. It could have been a little bit after, a while after. I'm not sure. But either way, Neil's girlfriend at the time had a pretty strange encounter with him that seemed quite suspicious. One night, she said he had come home covered in mud. And when she asked what had happened to him, why are you covered in mud? Why is there mud all over your vehicle? He explained to her that he had got his truck stuck in a place called Lee Creek Park area. Now, I understand if you were going to a park and maybe you were four-wheeling with your truck or something like that, and you might get it stuck, but this was in the middle of the night that he came home. How long was his truck actually stuck for, right? So this was assumed to be around the same time that Dianne went missing, but there was never enough evidence to press charges on him and anything to do with the case. Now, the good part. During Christmas break week in 1984, two hunters, and I've heard that this was a father and a son, they were at Lee Creek Park in Cedarville, which is in Crawford County, and which is just about 20 minutes outside of Fort Smith or so. Crawford County is just the next county over, and Fort Smith is in Sebastian County, just for reference. I know what you're thinking, and yes, the same Lee Creek Park that Neil claims he was at when he supposedly got in his truck stuck in the mud, suspiciously around the same time that Dianne went missing. How coincidental is that? So, this interview that they found out about Neil getting his truck stuck, I'm guessing was before the time that the hunters were in Lee Creek Park, because if it was after, it might have been a little bit of different story with the police and Neil, but we'll see. Why Neil wasn't taken into custody and questioned further or investigated more is beyond me. I don't have no idea. I want to know, did detectives ever search his truck or home for any evidence? Was any form of DNA taken or blood tests done to clear him at all? I mean, I know back in the 1980s, there wasn't DNA like there is now. There's most certainly wouldn't have been able to use touch DNA or anything like that. But what they did do back then was a blood test to see if a blood type matches something they have in evidence to a person that they think is a suspect. And for them, it worked out pretty good. But either way, if they didn't do that, why not? Did they not have any evidence or any blood or anything like that to test against? I'm not sure, because the report doesn't specify any of that. I don't know the answers, unfortunately, but if not, then why not? Why didn't they do the tests, or at least just take his blood in case they come up with some evidence later? The hunters discovered what they believed to be human remains. I'm not sure what distinct characteristics they saw to assume this, but I'm guessing at least a skeleton or maybe some artifacts like clothing or personal belongings to assume that it was human remains. Not long after the discovery, officials determined that they were in fact human remains and later were identified as the remains of Dianne Luckett Nelms. Besides the cause of death in the report, which was blunt force trauma to the back of the head, and some small clues about when she may have been disposed of there, because all they have to do is look at the remains and the decomposition, and they could pretty much figure out how long her remains have been in the place. But there was not, or has not been, any other leads or arrests in her case. Neil eventually passed away, so if he was guilty, he took that to the grave with him for sure. Members of Diane's family have waited decades to find out what happened to her beloved daughter, sister, and mother. But even with minimal information in an incomplete case file, not even shared with the family until 2021, and not knowing what happened to Dianne has weighed heavy on them. They're still hopeful that there is someone out there with the answers they need to solve Dianne's case. So if you or someone you know may have been a patron at the Foxfire Club or Tiffany's in Fort Smith or Harry's Bar in Roland, Oklahoma around early July of 1983 when Dianne went missing and later discovered murdered, or if you had any interactions with Neil or Wildfire Productions based out of Harry's Bar in Oklahoma, please call Fort Smith Police Department at 479-785-4221. And finally, since there may be a connection to another Fort Smith case, the disappearance of Linda Reynolds, who went missing on May 17, 1982, and who we did a story on in episode 1, and she was also a patron of these area clubs, please call the same number for the Fort Smith Police Department if you have any information at all. Even if you don't think it's relevant, it may be to the police. Alright, that's the end of our story for today. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on a new episode of Crime Driven with me, Gigi. Take care.